Rights and burdens of the affirmative and negative. Kinapipaste ko na lang to sa unang na-search ni Rizzy. Thus, after we have discussed the sides of debate, let us discuss the burdens primarily on the burden of proof. Firstly, on the burden of proof. It originated from the Latin word onus probandi, and we have searched all over the net. Most of the sites show that it was mostly used in law, or one source points to Roman law, originated from Roman law. Take this for example. Mr. Brown is accusing Mr. Blonde that he slept with his wife. Making that accusation, Mr. Brown now has the burden of proof. He needs to prove his accusations. By definition, it is the obligation to provide sufficient supporting evidence for his claim or accusation. It is also used in philosophical arguments. For example, God exists. So let's call him the affirmative and this brown-shirted boy the negative. So blue shirt said God exists, and he should supply his claim with evidences. Instead, he said, can you prove that God does not exist? And he attempts to shift the burden of proof to the negative. Well, one characteristic of burden of proof is you can shift the burden of proof. The burden is always on those who make the claim. This is a fallacy. It is called an argument to ignorance, or argumentum ad ignorantum. If the negative can prove your claim, it does not mean that your assertion is proven to be true. Or the source of this fallacy is the assumption that something is true unless proven otherwise. In the context of debate, however, the affirmative must present compelling reasons why the status quo is inadequate and should be replaced by the claim being advocated. So you might think that the negative also presents evidences to defend his argument. Are these presentation of evidence not considered a burden of proof? Well, technically, yes, but in a debate, we call it the burden of presumption. Burden of presumption means an idea that is taken to be true, or often used as the basis of 4 other ideas. Why presumption? Because in this context, we need to know how viable the affirmative's proposition is, and it is challenging the presumption of the negative. The negative perceives or presumes the status quo as effective, at least for the time being, and it does not require any change or reform of some sort. So an example is, to give you a clearer grasp of that, this is an example from the movie which we were recently tasked to watch, The Great Debaters. So the affirmative here is Negroes should be admitted to state universities. The negative presumed her proposition, and okay, let's say we admitted Negroes to state universities in the South. He said that would result in nothing but more racial hatred. To continue that point, because of racism, it would be impossible for a Negro to be happy. And if someone is unhappy, it is impossible to see how they could receive a proper education. Now, that is his presumption. The negative is presuming the affirmative's proposition. Next burden is prima facie. I don't know. It's a Latin expression meaning at first sight. It is also commonly used in law to describe a case that is strong enough to justify further debate. Now let's go back to our example. For Mr. Brown, after he has accused Mr. Blonde, there must be a prima facie evidence for his case to be presented or taken to the court. Now these are the possible evidences that I could list. Belongings was left on the room. Witness or intimate text messages. Now these evidences indirectly points to Mr. Blonde, so that is viable enough to be taken to the court. In a debate, you don't need verification to be involved in a debate, because you are going to give your prima facie case, and the debate in itself. Yun. You're going to give your prima facie case in the debate itself. Both negative and affirmative will give their reasonable stand for their proposition. Now, prima facie, by definition, is based on the first impression, accepted as correct until proven otherwise. Emphasis on that last words, because we are debating after all. So, only one side would win until proven otherwise. Burden of rebuttal, basahin nyo na lang ito. Expound kung kaya. Point of information. Now, this is one right we could identify. This is when a member of team opposing that of the current speaker gets to briefly interrupt current speaker, offering a point of information in the form of a question or a statement. So, that's it. If you have any questions, you must raise your hand to the current speaker. Now, this is what it looks like. This is a debate from YouTube. I just searched formal debate on the first video that appears.
Secondly, we would like to mention that yes, if you really want those to solve the problems of those in poverty, then why don't we concentrate the money for the people?
See, you are given a limited time, so you must utilize your time to deliver your speech. In this particular debate, she was given a 5 minutes, and she accepts the question, but at the cost of reducing. If you answer that question, then you risk your time consuming answering that question, because it's only 5 minutes. But on the other hand, you also have the right to decline the point of information. Take this for example. No, thank you. You can kindly reject the point of information. So that's one right for. That's a right for the affirmative and negative. Yun lang. Sources. Lalagay ko pa pala yung source ng YouTube. Tapos